Okay, so to finish up on CSS with our JavaFX applications, we're going to take a look at inline styling. So we can see an example right here where we're creating a label. So we put some text inside of that label, something like hello world. We're then going to use the setStyle method, and the thing that we're passing into this method is going to be a string with a set of the different rules that we want to apply to that particular controller, to that, in this case, this specific label. Additionally, with the setStyle method, we can also use that getStyle class, and we can use the add method again. But now, instead of specifying the name of some custom class, we can instead specify the name of a particular rule, so a property and value pair like this. We can go ahead and apply that to our label. So in this case, what we're showing is we want to first set the family and the size for our font. So we're setting the family to serif, putting the font size as 24 points. We then add another rule, so we're going to make the font weight bold. So we'll take a quick look at this with the example we have right now. So if we come back over to NetBeans, so for this particular example, what I'll go ahead and do is just momentarily comment this out. So we'll go ahead and just kind of ignore the rules that are being applied in our style sheet so that we can instead focus on just what we want to apply to our label right here in our Java code. I'll leave the set ID alone since all that does is affect the color of the text, but we're not going to be changing that with any of these inline rules. So the first one we'll go ahead and do was label.setStyle. Well, they're going to use this string right here, so we're going to do the family, fx font family, set that to serif. We're then going to use a semicolon to separate the different rules. So this is very similar to, if you look at our style sheet, how each one of the different rules has a semicolon at the end of it. So very similar to how we write our Java code. So we're going to be separating these out as a semicolon separated list. The next thing we wanted was for the font size. So we're going to do fx font size. We're going to set it to 24 points, I believe is what we wanted. Yes. So we're going to do 24 points right there. And then we'll also go ahead and add another one, showing another way that we can go about this with setStyle class, or a getStyle class. So it'll be label.getStyle class. We'll call that method. And then we'll call the add method from there. And right here, we're going to specify another rule, fx font weight. Set it to bold. Go ahead and save this. And then if we run it, we can now see that in this case, we've got a font family that does actually work with the machine that I'm doing this on. So we can actually see hello world with that serif font on it. We set the font size to 24, so it's a little bit larger than our buttons at this point. And we also set it to bold, so we can also see that the thickness of the lines for each of our characters, that those are a little bit thicker than for our two buttons. Okay. So the way that I'll go ahead and do this is I'm going to go ahead and leave these two lines here, but I'm going to go ahead and comment both of them out. And save that and uncomment most of this and leave these two lines commented out. I'll save that and back over here. So we've seen a little bit with inline styling, but there are a couple of notes to mention about how we go about approaching that. So in the vast majority of cases, I would highly encourage you to keep your Java code and your CSS code in separate files. There are two primary reasons why I would recommend you do this. The first is that for each of these different files in your programs, there is a primary purpose that that file is meant to serve. Usually, the type of file is a pretty good indicator of the kind of code that you should expect to find in that file. So in most cases, you should only have Java code in your Java files, and you should only have CSS code in your CSS files. Additionally, because of the fact that inline style requires modifying the Java file itself, the changes that you make to just the CSS that you put into your Java code, those will require that you have to recompile the program before you can rerun it. Whereas if you only make a change to a CSS file, you don't have to recompile the program, you only have to rerun it. So typically you should reserve inline style for very small instances of applying CSS to an application. Typically it's for situations where you have one, maybe two rules that you want to apply to a very particular control. You don't want to create an entirely separate CSS file to do this. And you also should make sure that if you do that, that you're more or less guaranteed to never have to change that in the future. Say like if you need to add more and more rules to it over time, it would be a much better approach if you just went ahead and created that in your own CSS file. So there's also this consideration for how well that will scale as you add more and more code to your program. So this is going to wrap up everything for CSS. Getting into the next video, we're going to start talking about some of these advanced controls. So the first two controls that I want to introduce in the next video are going to be radio buttons and checkboxes.